class, it's Dr. Miller. Welcome to Integration into Ministry. This is a class that will focus on nonprofit management, but which should be applicable to all areas of leadership. In this class, we'll analyze various styles of leadership, look at what the Bible has to say into the field, and hopefully prepare ourselves to be future leaders in the church and in the world. I'm a pastor, a professor, and a nonprofit manager with 25 years of experience in leading the church. I carry a senior certified professional certification from the Society of Human Resource Management, and I've spent years teaching leadership in the classroom as well as practicing it on the front lines of strategic organizational development. My hope for you in this class is that you'll develop skills that you'll use in ministry in years to come. If you need anything during the course, please reach out to me. Welcome to Integration into Ministry. Well, hello class. It's good to be with you again this week. I've enjoyed interacting with you online and reading your essays, and it's good to be with you again for a new week of studies. I want to start out our class, as I will every week, by reporting to you a God sighting from my week, and I hope you're on the lookout for what God is doing in your life, and then I'll tell you the outline of what we're going to accomplish today. So this was my God sighting for the week. At my church, where I am right now, which is Real Life Church of Los Angeles, we have an important prayer ministry that goes on where we pray for things like the healing of people's physical injuries and sickness. And we've seen some amazing things happen for people when we pray for them. And we've begun offering classes in healing prayer. If you know the story of Jesus, you know that Jesus went around healing people wherever he went, and he then taught his disciples to do the same thing. When you read the book of Acts, which is the story of the early church, you see that his disciples were carrying on the business of healing ministry as well. And then, because Jesus says in Matthew 28, "Go teach the world everything I've taught you," we know that his disciples went on to make more disciples and to teach more people the things that they would have learned from Jesus, which would have included praying for people's healing. Jesus healed the sick, raised the dead, cleansed the lepers, brought paralytics to walk. We see in the book of Acts, James and John healing the sick, raising the dead, healing paralytics, doing all the same kinds of things. And in today's world, those same ministries go on. Now, some people have never seen those kinds of things before and are skeptical about it. Some people have seen all kinds of supernatural things and don't have any trouble believing in it. Some people are open to it, but they just need to see it with their own two eyes. And so at Real Life Church, we've started offering classes in healing prayer, which we offer by Zoom this year. So it's all online. Prior to that, it was in person. And in our desire to spread this ministry, we went from offering little classes for about 10 people at a time to doing something new this last week. This last week, we offered what we called a crash course in healing prayer, which was a 2-hour seminar online. And about 75 people signed up to be a part of it. It was a big Zoom call. There were lots of little squares. And there was about an hour of teaching from the Bible about healing and how Jesus healed people. And then we asked people if they wanted prayer for healing. And the first woman who said yes had a neck injury from weightlifting where she had dropped some weights on her neck. And she was in pretty much ongoing pain from it. And even during the call, she said, "It hurts right now." And so one of the leaders on the call prayed for her, and everybody on the call watched. And when he said amen, she was quiet for a second. And everybody wondered what would have happened. And then all of a sudden she says, "Oh my God, it doesn't hurt anymore." And she starts bending her neck around, and she goes, look, I couldn't touch my chin to my neck just a minute ago, and now I can. I'm not even kidding. And then she said, I was more skeptical about this than anybody else on the call when we began. I can't believe this. And everybody was amazed. And then several other people said that they wanted prayer for healing as well. And we saw several people healed. People healed of pain in their skulls and pain in their back and pain in their feet. We had some people who received prayer for blood disorder, and we won't get the results of that until they go get their blood tests because they weren't in any pain. But a doctor can tell them whether or not they're healed. But we saw some amazing things in our crash course in healing prayer this week, and that was my God sighting for the week. That was where God really showed up. There's actually another way that God's at work in the life of our church, which involves our building. And I'll share more about that with you in the weeks to come as that story progresses. But God is very much at work in my life and in the lives of the people at our church. I hope you're on the lookout for God as well. And what that means is you just need to take a little time every day to pray and say, Jesus, I want to see you today. I want to hear from you today. Be real in my life. And Jesus is just waiting for an opportunity to spend time with you and let you know how much he loves you. And so be on the lookout for God. And if you see God, if God shows up in an amazing way this week, make sure you send me a note and let me know about it. Maybe I'll even share the story here if you'd like. Those are amazing stories when they happen. So keep an eye out for a God sighting this week. Now, I want to give you a brief outline of what we're going to cover in the class this week. Today, I want to go back and look at the leadership cube that I introduced in the first lecture, and I want to flesh that out a little bit. The first lecture was just an introduction. Week 2 was a look at some biblical models of leadership, some biblical examples of leadership that are going to undergird all the rest of what we do. And now we're going to look at modern leadership theory. What makes a good leader? How leaders operate? What are some different things that leaders run into that they have to navigate their way through? That's what we're going to look at. So I want to go back and review the leadership cube again, because I find that to be a really helpful model for the essential ingredients in any healthy organization and the essential ingredients that any leader needs to pull together to make an organization go. And then I want to talk about leadership styles today. There are a lot of different ways that our personality shape our experience of leadership, both the kind of leadership that we'll respond to and the kind of leadership that we give to others. And I want to look at some different leadership styles today, 4 in particular, and you'll get the chance to evaluate what you think of them and how you've seen them play out in your life. Now, I want to say before we dive in today, as you're studying ministry leadership, some people think, well, that's not me. I'm not a pastor. I'm not a worship leader. I'm not a Bible study leader. I don't lead anything. So I don't need a class on ministry leadership. Well, here's the important message I want you to begin with today. Everybody is a leader sooner or later. Everybody becomes a leader sooner or later. If you become a parent, you're a leader to your kids. If you're ever in a crisis situation, the leaders are anybody who steps up to take responsibility and help address the situation. You'll be forced into a leadership position one way or another as life goes along. So everybody has things to learn about ministry and leadership. If it's new to you, great. If you don't feel like you're ready for it, great. That's what this training is for. Don't in your mind write this off. This is important for you as well. Okay, so that's my word for starting off our class today. Now let's get into, again, I forgot the last element of the outline. We're going to review the leadership cube. We're going to talk about leadership styles. And then we're going to do a book review. of a very famous book by Stephen Covey called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And that's what we're going to do today. So here we go. Okay, I again want to review the leadership cube that I described in the first lecture. And I'm going to flesh it out a little bit today. I'm going to go over the same 6 elements that any good leader brings to an effective organization, but I'm going to look at specific examples tied to the Bible and to modern leadership. I want to look at the examples of the life of Moses and Jesus from the Bible, and then I want to look at the modern examples of Starbucks, which first came to birth in the 1970s, and Apple computers, which came to birth in the 1980s. And I want to look at their founders and leaders and leadership principles. And then I want to apply all of that, since this is a ministry leadership course, to the founding of a church and what a pastor might want to think about doing if she or he was beginning at a new church, whether they're starting from the ground up or inheriting a church from some other previous leader and leading it themselves. And even if you have no intentions of being a pastor in your future, the leadership principles carry across the board, and you can use them in any context. So those are the examples I want to start with. Remember, in the leadership cube, the first element of that is the leader herself or himself. And that's simply because most great organizations have begun with somebody who was inspired to bring them about. Very rarely are great organizations birthed by a committee or a neighborhood survey. It's usually a person who is inspired. If you go to the Bible and you look at Moses, Moses was called by God against his own will to go and set the people free. It helps when God speaks directly to you because you kind of know what you're supposed to do there. In Jesus, we see the same thing. Jesus was God in human form, but God who is 3 in 1. And so Jesus and the Father would commune. Often Jesus would go away to be by himself and spend time in prayer so that his will was perfectly aligned with the will of the Father. And so whereas Moses would answer God, I don't want to do this, send somebody else, Jesus would say, not my will, but your will be done. And so in both of those cases, you see a leader who is inspired by the direction of God. When you get to modern leadership examples, the leaders who form organizations are often found by different things. But there's a common thing that they often share. Often they look at the world around them and they perceive a need or a lack which bothers them. They have a holy discontent, one writer has called it. So if you look at Starbucks, there were actually 3 guys who founded that organization. It came about around 1971. And essentially, people were settling for a low-grade burned coffee. The coffee of the day was Folgers, and it was cheap, mass-distributed, 25 cents a cup, and it was just a drug. It was caffeine. And they realized that you could perfect the production of coffee in a way that the flavor was better and the experience of drinking coffee was better. And they became so discontent with what is called first wave coffee that they brought about Starbucks, which is now called second wave coffee. And we're already in the third wave. I'm a coffee roaster myself, and so I know a lot about coffee making. So Starbucks began with 3 guys who were inspired to do a better coffee making experience, both the product itself and the experience of the product. Apple computers similarly came about under the guidance of Steve Jobs. And Steve Jobs realized that in the birth and the advent of computers, there was a whole new technical world coming to be. But he also realized that computers were being overtaken by the corporate world to be used as business tools. And he realized that there was a creative, artistic, inspirational element of computer programming that people were ignoring. And in his marketing brilliance, he created a rival computer company to the dominant computer companies of the day. He really looked at IBM and said it can be something different. When it comes to modern church pastors, modern church leaders, the ones who go and start churches are often the pioneers. They're the ones who look at the world around them and say, churches aren't doing this right. Churches aren't being effective enough. Churches could reach more people in new ways if they tried new things. And often you'll see this in my book. It's like this. There was a generation that saw churches as a classroom, and they became very boring. But they depended on an audience who felt obligated to go to church. And some pioneers rose up and said, it doesn't have to be that way. Church can be engaging and passionate and meaningful and powerful and relevant. And they created a new style of worship that changed the history of the church, not just in America, but around the world. Church planters, church initiators, or the old world would call them apostles, usually have some sense of discontent, some holy discontent for where the church has been, and an inspired vision of where it will go. So the first element in the leadership cube is the leader herself or himself. Secondly, the second thing that comes with that is a vision. And often it is the leader who inspires the vision. It is the leader who dreams up the vision. And I want to read to you a couple of different vision statements of companies to give you a sense for what they say they're trying to accomplish. And sometimes vision statements are very good and very accurate, and sometimes they're not very accurate. So here's the corporate mission statement for Apple Computers. To bring the best personal computing products and support to students, educators, designers, scientists, engineers, business persons, and consumers in over 140 countries around the world. So they actually have a very specific list, and this was not thrown together casually. This was an important decision that they made. And so it's interesting that they start with you. They start with students. We're going to build better computer products and service for students. And then secondly, for me, for educators. And then they go to designers, which is sort of an interesting, vague term for creatives. Scientists, so you get a sense for technical innovation that blesses humanity. And then engineers. So now you're getting into the hard work of construction and building. And then they put business persons next to last. And remember, in the early days, that's who computers were for. They were for businesses to make money. And Apple Computers' vision statement puts the business end almost last. And then finally they ran out with consumers, which I think is just a catch-all and everybody else, which really means the business people are last, which is funny because Apple is a very marketable business that has trillions of dollars. But that's Apple's vision statement. The vision statement for Starbucks is a much shorter one, tighter one, and interesting, creative. To inspire and nurture the human spirit, one person, one cup, and one neighborhood at a time. It's a little bit poetic because you don't think of Starbucks as there to inspire and nurture the human spirit. You think it's there to make me a cup of coffee so I can get to work, right? Or a cup of coffee so I can take a break at the end of the day and just sit by myself and look out the window. So inspire and nurture the human spirit is an interesting creative take for Starbucks. You can decide whether or not that's what they're doing and if they're doing it well. But those are their vision statements. Every leader has a vision for what they're trying to do. If you are a leader, it is absolutely essential that you name what you're trying to do. Don't leave this vague. Go back to it over and over and over again. At our church, we say that we're here to lead lost people to Jesus. A community of grace with a God-sized vision for every generation. And that's the vision we began with, and that's what we continue to this day. And so we emphasize grace. We're a church that errs on the side of love before law, and we're for every generation. And we have tons of children and teenagers and adults and seniors. And we want every generation represented in our church. We're broadening out with probably ministries in new languages pretty soon too. So that's the vision, and it's absolutely critical. If you're the leader, name what the vision is, and hone it and refine it. Okay. Thirdly, the leader then needs to gather around himself or herself a team, and the team is critical to achieving what you want to achieve. We do more in teams than we do alone. There's some great basketball players for the Lakers who were so talented and confident that they never learned to pass the ball. And several great teams never made it to the championships because the top players didn't involve the rest of the team. They took all the best shots. And that is not how teams achieve. Now, an important thing to remember when we talk about teams is there's a difference between friends and allies. So let's keep this distinction clear when we talk about teams. A friend is a person who likes you for you. An ally is a person who likes you for what you're trying to accomplish. So friends will often stick with you despite the failures of your organization. Allies will stick with you if the organization is thriving, whether or not you're doing well. And it's important to know who's who, because if you confuse them, you can end up feeling betrayed. Friends and allies are not the same thing, and it's good to identify them as you put together who your team is. I'll give you an example from the life of Jesus. Judas traveled with Jesus for 3 years, saw Jesus' miracles, listened to Jesus' teachings, saw Jesus love outcasts, and in the end, he betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver so that Jesus would be arrested and crucified. Now, why would Judas do that? Biblical scholars theorize that perhaps Judas wanted to bring about a revolution to throw off the Roman Empire. And he thought the best way to do that was to get Jesus arrested and cause chaos in Jerusalem during their Independence Day celebration. And so perhaps in handing Jesus over, he was being an ally to what he had committed to, which was restoring Israel's power against Rome. But he proved in the end that he was not a faithful friend to Jesus and betrayed Jesus. It's important to know the difference between your friends and your allies, because they're both committed to you, but not for the same reasons. Another important thing to remember about teams, as you assemble a team, if you are a pastor hiring staff, if you're taking on the HR responsibilities of onboarding staff, A people hire A people and B people hire C people. What that means is that people who are truly great leaders will hire other people who are truly great leaders and not be intimidated by them and not be threatened by them. And they will actually bring people on their staff who are more talented than them because they know it will benefit the organization. People who are not great leaders are insecure and will always hire people who are worse at the job than themselves so that they won't feel threatened by them. As a result, you'll have an organization with a B-level leader, not an excellent leader, and then people under that person who are even less competent because the leader was afraid to hire people who are more talented. The best, happiest, most thriving organizations are led by excellent, non-intimidated leaders who are happy to hire people more talented than themselves. So A leaders hire other A leaders. B leaders will only hire C leaders. Now here's some thoughts. I'm going to advance here. Here's some thoughts on what you might do if you are a pastor starting out a church or inheriting a church from a previous leader and leading it. Here's some things to consider. One of the first things you want to do in the world of teams is identify the ghosts. The ghosts are the influences of people in the past, maybe people who are not even there anymore. If you have a retired former leader who's still sitting there in the pews of your church whispering to his friends about what he likes and doesn't like, that actually has a huge influence without being a part of the leadership structure. So identify the ghosts. What are the voices that people are listening to, whether or not those people are even there? What carries weight in that congregation? What are its sacred cows? Your first responsibility in any church as a leader is to be a court historian and find out how God has moved in that church in the past and what people have come to value in terms of their faith community. Know what the ghosts are. Know what the previous voices of leadership are. Secondly, you want to assess the present personnel. Now, if you're starting a church from the ground up, you get to decide who the first personnel are. If you're inheriting an organization that's already around, if you're a new leader coming in from outside, you have to assess who the personnel are. You have to assess who's most invested and least invested, and why are they invested. If they were a friend to the previous leader, they have very little alliance or commitment to you. Identify whether or not they're in this because they're 2 years away from retirement and they just need to hold on for the paycheck, or if they're really committed passionately to the vision of the church. Assess who the leaders are. And then you're going to want to do two things. You're going to want to take the most talented leaders and develop them. Send them to conferences. Send them to training. Spend time with them. Encourage their hobbies and outside activities. If they need secondary forms of income, because often people who work for churches will do church work part-time and then have the other side gigs, make sure you're encouraging them to maintain financial stability so that the church isn't a threat to their ability to feed themselves. Assess who your top talent is and invest in them. That's where you're going to win. Look at who your misplaced talent are. People who might be good people, but they're in a position that they don't like at all or aren't good at, or they got shifted to it in a previous era and they hate it, and then redeploy them. And it's great when you can redeploy them within the same institution if they want to be there but just don't like the job they're in. But sometimes you have to have those challenging but loving heart-to-hearts where you say to somebody, it doesn't look like this is the place for you. It doesn't look like you like it here. It doesn't look like you're happy here. What's a place where you could really see yourself thriving? And you do have to redeploy people so that they can find God's calling for themselves. It's not punishing them. It's encouraging them to pursue the place that God has called them to. Because if they hate their job and they're not good at their job, God hasn't called them to that job. And so redeploying the misplaced talent is second, behind developing the top leaders. And then I want to add a note on teams in churches. Always make sure that you're rotating your volunteer leaders. I see church after church take people and stick them in a volunteer position and leave them there until they die. Or leave them there until they run screaming from the building and never come back. At our church, when we put people in voluntary positions, we tell them, we'd like you to do this usually for a year. Go through 4 seasons of it and see if you like it. At that point, we'll look around. There may be other ministries in the church that you'd be better in or that you should try. We don't let anybody stay stuck in a volunteer position for a decade because you're going to burn them out. You're going to limit your ability to train new talent. You're going to stifle everybody's discipleship. Volunteer positions need to be rotated, and they all need to have an expiration date. I remember going into a church where people had been serving as ushers and usher captains for 20 years, and nobody else got to do it because it was their position. And we rotated them all because they should have been rotated 19 years ago, and they acted like someone had shot their dog. It was an absolute disaster because the previous administration had no competence for volunteer management. Volunteers need to be put in positions where they can experience and grow, and then rotate it. A contemporary secular organization that does this really well is Disney. When you work at Disney and you're an employee working on one of the rides, you work in a certain ride, you learn how it operates, you learn the script that you're supposed to deliver, you wear a certain costume, and after a season, they rotate you to a different ride. Because even if you're doing almost the same thing, it's a slightly different context, which involves some new learning. And that's an important rotational model for people's positions. So there you go. That keeps life fresh for them. So that's team. Number 4. Strategy. Now, a lot of churches tried to spiritualize strategy, and by spiritualize I mean they just don't have one, and they think that that's somehow spiritual. I talked to a church, and I said, do you have a strategy for how you're going to do that? And they said, yeah, we use the H&P method. And I thought, oh, this is amazing. They even have a name for it, H&P method. I said, what does H&P stand for? And they said, hope and pray. We just hope and pray it's going to work. We have no idea what we're doing. And that's how a lot of churches go at strategy, unfortunately, because they think it's just a spiritual exercise. They think if they are absolutely incompetent and don't plan and don't think about what they're doing, that God will just take care of them. And this year, it's predicted that in America, 1 out of every 5 churches is going to close permanently because they were barely hanging on anyway. And with the coronavirus and the lockdown, they have lost their sustainability. And churches need to strategize. Think about where they're trying to get and how they're going to get there. And that's strategy and processes, which we're going to talk about next. If you look at the example of the Bible, Moses and Jesus, their strategy was do what God said. And God was speaking audibly to them, so they knew exactly what they were supposed to do. But you look at the modern leadership models that exist in the world, and there are a variety of different strategies that business leaders can employ. No one strategy is right for every organization, but you have to have one. And so Starbucks' strategy was to start small with a little cafe in Seattle and absolutely perfect it before they spread it. They wanted the right interior design, the right chairs to sit in, the right coffee, the right shaped cups, the right names for the drinks. They wanted to perfect the first one down to the last detail before they opened up a second one. And when they opened up a second one, they wanted it to look exactly like the first one. Because the first one was successful, so they wanted to then replicate it. If you go around the country right now, there's actually, Starbucks is still just using, I believe, 6 different styles of stores. You can Google this. And every Starbucks looks the same as one of those 6 styles. They replicate them all over the country. So they varied a little bit. But again, the idea was start small, get it right, and then multiply. Apple took a slightly different approach. Apple took the approach of there's already IBM everywhere. There's already computers everywhere. But they have a certain ethos of corporate stagnation. And what we want to do is bring creativity and independence and individuality to the world of computing. And the hallmark event was a commercial that is now famous, and you can go watch on YouTube. It's sad how fuzzy the production value is because it was made so long ago. But it's this image of an Olympian woman running, and she's running through robotic-like people who are automatons who have no life and no energy and no color. And she's, I believe, dressed in white and red. And she runs through with a sledgehammer and throws a sledgehammer and shatters the totalitarian Big Brother kind of industry that computers were. And that became a defining image for Apple computers. They didn't invent the computer. The computer already existed. They invented the modern charisma of computing, the modern charisma of having your laptop in which you creatively express yourself. And that's Apple computers. That was their strategy was take something that already exists and do it better and rival the image that it has. Some people will tell you the best strategy is to find a niche and perfect it and then spread it. Some people will say find a niche and then perfect it and spread it. So for instance, I have a friend who started selling batteries because he realized all I have to do is sell them better than other people. I don't even have to sell them cheaper. He says, I realized what was happening is that when people searched for batteries online, because they wanted to buy them, whichever one came up first is the one they would click on. So he figured out how Google's SEO worked, and he tinkered around with that until he got his company to come up at the top of search engines. And so people were buying batteries from his company. They weren't cheaper than other batteries. They weren't somehow magically better. He just got his way to the top of the battery niche. And then he sold that company. And then he went on and did the same thing with another product, which is not a product he invented. He didn't create it. He didn't do it cheaper. He didn't do it better. He just figured out how to market it best. Because if you find that niche and then get to the top of the pile, you're going to get traction. There's no one single strategy that's right, but you have to have a strategy. And so that's my thoughts on strategy. 5 is processes. Processes are just the systems by which you're going to operate. And you already have processes in your organization or your church. You may just not have created them on purpose, and you may not have any control over them, and you may not understand how they work. But they're already there, because there's certain ways people do everything. There's a famous book called Who Moved My Cheese? We're using the metaphor of a mouse in a maze that always learns where the cheese is, and so it goes to the same path until somebody moves the cheese. And one of the responsibilities of leaders in organizations that have been around for a while, like a church that needs to be revitalized, is to move the cheese, to get people out of the systems they're stuck in, and create inertia, create this movement toward, or defy inertia, create this movement towards new processes. In the modern world, technology is incredible here. If you're in the world of church, you're going to want to look at either Church Community Builder or Planning Center Online. You're going to want to look at PushPay. There's some really top-notch software that help create processes for churches. You're going to need a financial accounting process which is responsible and safe, and you're going to need processes for your volunteer management. And there are people who have expertise in any one of these fields, but because we're in the world of the information boom, it's not hard to find this kind of information. You don't even have to go to the library anymore. But you're going to have to develop processes which are streamlined, effective, and which are in your hands, not just existing because they've been around for a while. And finally, remember KPIs, which stands for Key Performance Indicators. And key performance indicators are the things you measure to decide whether or not you're succeeding. What you care about, you're going to measure. And so what you're measuring, you're going to care about. And so normally what churches measure are heads and dollars. How many people are attending? How are our finances doing? Are they going up or down? And that's kind of the standard numbers for churches because it's the easiest ones to pay attention to. But it might not be the best ones. Because you're not going to be measuring attendance in the world of online media. You're going to be measuring engagement. And just attending is probably not the level of engagement that really tells you whether or not people are growing in faith. So at our church, we measure things like how many people are being baptized, and how many people are in small groups, and how many new people are visiting church for the first time, and how many people became donors for the first time. Because those are indicators that people are taking steps in the process of growth. In churches, you'll be surrounded by anecdotal evidence of growth. You hear stories of someone who wants to go into full-time ministry or become a missionary, and those are important narratives to share with the church. But we try to identify key performance indicators that tell us whether or not the church is growing in depth and discipleship and not just attendance and money. So those are the the 6 elements of the leadership cube, and we're going to use that throughout the rest of the class. So there's my little introduction to 4 different leadership styles that are very recognizable and very common. And a good thing to do as you think through these is to ask yourself, what kind of leader do you most like to answer to? And what kind of leader do you most want to be? Again, the 4 styles are authoritarian, which is a very top-down, hierarchical style of decision making, where the leader makes all the critical decisions and dictates to his employees or her employees how things are to go. And this style works really well in a situation where you have a lot of untrained employees who don't know what else to do. And they look to the leader to say, what are we supposed to do? And when the leader either possesses all of the knowledge or all of the authority to make decisions, employees depend on an authoritarian leadership style. Let's talk pros and cons as we go. So the pro of that is you have a very centralized form of decision making. It doesn't have to go through a lot of committees, and it tends to create strong boundaries in chaotic situations. So often in the midst of crisis, authoritarian leadership is what people need. The downside, of course, is that power can be abused, and in most situations it is. And so an authoritarian leader, when you see them in the realm of government, is a dictator. And most people don't like dictators because they get power and then they use it for their own benefit and not for the benefit of the people that they govern. The next form of leadership is the paternalistic leadership. And that's a little bit of a sexist term because it identifies it with a stereotype of fathers. But it's the description of the leadership style is very similar to authoritarian leadership. But in this case, the paternalistic leader is parental towards the employees. The leader cares about the employees, feels compassion towards them, maybe knows their stories, but still is the key decision maker and can't be overruled. You see this often in mom and pop restaurants where husband and wife maybe open a restaurant together and then they employ all the kids and some of the cousins, and it's very clear whose restaurant it is. It's very clear who runs the restaurant. But because they're all family members, they're not treated as objects. They're not treated as like a unrelated employee might be. They're treated as somehow special because they're tied by blood to the owner. The next style is democratic. And of course, we know this style because we talk about American democracy all the time. Democratic leadership styles, you'll see manifestations of that in companies where the employees on their name tag, instead of having staff or employee, it'll say team member, because they're trying to communicate to the staff, we're all on the same team and we all get to contribute to this. And democratic style, if it's truly a democratic organization, tries to involve the opinions and preferences of a broad range of the employees in the organization. The pro of this is that it often makes employees feel dignified, they feel valuable, they can learn to be creative and spread their creative wings a little bit. They're often better trained as leaders because they've had the opportunity to explore their own growth and their own leadership as they work in that company. The downside, of course, is that democratic leadership styles lead to very long conversations, and in some contexts, a lot of conflict, because if everybody's voice counts, it becomes difficult to make a definitive decision. And often in a democratic structure, the leader who is the ultimate authority for making a decision is then chastised for deciding against anyone in the organization, because the operating assumption is nobody gets to be the leader. And so universities often function or communicate that they function as democratic leadership structures, and faculties and administrators fight with each other with every decision that gets made, and often they're made slowly, if at all. And so some of the downsides of a democratic leadership structure are those. Often happens in churches that are governed by a congregationalist polity, where everybody gets to vote on every issue, because not everyone is an expert in every issue, but in a congregationalist church, everybody gets a voice in every issue. And so that's the democratic leadership style. And then finally, the laissez-faire style sounds irresponsible. It sounds like negligence. And I've seen situations where pastors did use this negligently because all they wanted to do is preach. And they didn't want to visit with people, and they didn't want to counsel people, and they didn't want to work with the staff, and they didn't want to lead change. So all they did is show up and preach. And then they climbed back in their studies. And in that case, it is negligent, because their church suffers for lack of leadership when they do that. And some very charismatic preachers get away with it, but their church is often in shambles behind the scenes, and definitely in shambles when that person leaves or retires. So the laissez-faire style is not meant to be an abdication of responsibility, but rather a distribution of responsibility. A good laissez-faire manager has vice presidents or middle managers governing branches of an organization, perhaps, and that allows the leader to then roam between various locations and converse and interact with different mid-level managers. If a lead scientist hired a team of brilliant scientists to work under her, and they all knew exactly what they were working on and how they were to go about it, she might then be able to take a laissez-faire style in order to set them free to use their gifts. So sometimes a laissez-faire style is preferred. So those are the four, and what's important to realize is none of them are right or wrong. The authoritarian style, even though the word authoritarian often has negative connotations in the American context, it's not a wrong style. There are contexts that call for an authoritarian style. Likewise, the laissez-faire style is not simply negligent. There are contexts and personalities that do better with a laissez-faire style. What's important for the leader is to realize that he or she has the opportunity to vacillate between different styles given the context or the season that they're in. So in certain seasons, an organization or a bank of employees will need more direct leadership and need more guidance, and will want a stronger paternalistic or authoritarian communication so that they'll know what they're supposed to do. In some contexts, employees feel stifled by that and need more freedom. And a good leader will alternate between different styles in different seasons. So those are the 4 leadership styles. Write this in the comments or send it to me in a direct message. Write it in your homework notes. What's your preferred leadership style to answer to? What kind of leader do you want to answer to? And what kind of leader do you want to be? You might even distinguish what do you think you are and what would you rather be most of the time. And so go ahead and think about and answer those questions, and we'll go on and do our book review. All right. To round out today, let's do a book review. Again, each week I want to introduce you to another piece of literature in the world of leadership management so that we can have a number of books under our belt. I realize you may not have time to read all of these books yourself, so I want to at least expose you to the general content, the general outlines of these texts, and then if there's one that you really like, go ahead and get a copy of it and read it yourself. These are all great books, and they're all influential books. I've picked books that are popular and not just my own pet preferences. And so if you like any of these, go ahead and chase them down. Today I want to talk about a book that has sold millions of copies, sold like wildfire, a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And what Stephen Covey has done here is looked at the styles and personalities of a number of top leaders. And he tells stories about these leaders in the book. And so they're fascinating internal up-close reviews of who these people are and how they live their lives. And what I want to do is just kind of go over the outline of what the 7 habits are, and then I'll allow you to go read his book and look for the particular stories that are all so fascinating. So it's important to realize the 7 habits are tied together on a continuum of maturity, a continuum of growth. So Covey says that any leader is in a process of growing towards being a better leader and a more mature person. We're all moving towards independence, and then interdependence, and then continual improvement. The move towards independence is a move away from, obviously, dependence on leaning on someone else and learning to be self-reliant. And there are 3 habits that Covey puts in this section, under the section of growing in independence. These are 3 things that should help one grow to become more independent. First, Covey says we should be proactive. We should have what we identify as a circle of concern and a circle of influence. The circle of concern are the problems that we're worried about. And the circle of influence is the place where we can go out and proactively change the world. Covey says, focus on being proactive rather than passively waiting for bad things to happen to you and then just processing those. Good leaders go out and look for places where they can advance instead of just waiting for bad things to happen against which they can defend themselves. This is just something you see in, for instance, Fortune 500 leaders. They tend to have a drive to go out and explore the world and conquer things and learn things and achieve things. And they don't let the threats to them hold them back. Great leaders don't hide in their homes and wait to see what happens. They're eagerly seeking to advance themselves and explore the world. So being proactive helps us grow independent. It helps us grow away from our home and our places of comfort and security. Secondly, Covey says, effective leaders always begin with the end in mind. Always think first about where you want to end up before you begin your process. This is what I talked about in the area of strategies. Every organization ought to have a strategy for how it's going to do what it wants to do. For a church, are you going to try to do big, attractive events that draw people to your church? Are you going to try to send people out in the communities and have them reach their neighbors? What is it that your church is going to do to fulfill its mission? If you're trying to talk to people who don't know Jesus, you may have to think about whether or not you're focusing on that end and then designing all your ministries around it. Because I've seen a lot of churches say that they want to talk to people about Jesus, but then the church service is something that only an insider would understand. Only someone who already knows the church would get it and like it and want to be there and feel welcomed. And a newcomer, a stranger, would feel totally out of place and uncomfortable. So if that church is being honest that their goal is to introduce people to Jesus, they should design their worship service with the end in mind. All effective people and all effective organizations do that. Begin with the end in mind and then design your processes and your strategy and all of your presentation around the end. And sometimes that means reassessing what the end is and whether or not you're on the right track. Because some churches begin with the end in mind and they start out doing things that'll lead people to Jesus, and then time passes and the methods by which they are leading people to Jesus no longer work. Choir concerts and organ concerts don't lead people to Jesus anymore. And yet they won't change because people got attached to those things long ago. And so the world changes. The mission should still be leading lost people to Jesus. And the methods by which churches do it have to adapt to stay true to the end, to stay true to the goal that they started with. And so begin with the end in mind. Thirdly, Covey says we ought to keep first things first. And here he graphs out a really helpful quadrant of 4 levels of things that we need to take care of. There are things that we need to do, things that we need to plan for, things that we need to delegate to somebody else, and things that we should just eliminate. And he divides these into quadrants. I'll put this up on your screen so you can look at it. But he divides these into the sections of what's most urgent, not so urgent, only vaguely urgent, and something you really shouldn't do at all. This is just a good method of prioritization, of thinking through what's most important and when you need to accomplish it. Some pastors I know live in a constant state of reaction. They are what one theologian has called a quivering mass of availability. They just sit and wait to be called. They don't plan ahead. They write their sermons on Saturday, if not Sunday morning, which makes them not very good. And they have no to-do list through which they're working. They're just waiting for things to fall on their desk. It's an irresponsible way to go. It keeps you locked in dependence on what's happening to you, as opposed to moving towards independence and making things happen. So those are the first 3 habits that Covey names. The next 3 fall in the section of growing towards interdependence. And interdependence is when we work together as teams, when we love each other and care for each other, when we realize that we need each other, that we're not good alone. We can't function alone. And so here are his 3 habits that help us grow towards interdependence. We've now separated from a dependent need to be in reaction to the world around us, and now we need to grow in interdependence where we do depend on other people, but for all the right reasons. 1, he says, effective leaders think win-win. And he says this is a character-based code and not a strategy. Thinking win-win means I realize that there are things you want to achieve, there are things I want to achieve. And if I use my goal of achieving to help you achieve your goals, we're going to develop a camaraderie in which we can support each other. Now, I can't do that to manipulate you. I can't do that to get something out of you. I have to do that because I just realize it's the healthy, loving, thoughtful thing to do. If I incorporate your needs into my own desire to fulfill my needs, I can most likely take care of both of us and create a reciprocity in which you'll help me achieve what I'm seeking as well. So think win-win. Then, this is number 5 now, seek first to understand and then to be understood. And this is a biblical principle. The book of James says everyone should be slow to speak and quick to listen, slow to become angry, and quick to listen. Seek first to understand where others are coming from before you seek to assert yourself. This is an important one, and there are a lot of powerful leaders out there that don't do this. There are a lot of powerful political leaders that don't do this, but it's what mature adults do, and especially mature Christian adults. We seek first to understand and only then to be understood. Sixth, seek to what he uses the word synergize, which was a popular word 20 years ago. I don't hear it as much anymore, but synergize means work together in a happy harmony as a team in which people are understood and people are sharing and people are cooperating and people's creativity feeds off of each other. And if you've ever been in a context like that, there's nothing like it, where you have a team that loves what they're doing, they love being together, they love their goal and their mission, and they love seeing it succeed. So what used to be called synergizing is really just positive teamwork, and there is nothing like it. It's a kind of interdependence in which the leader realizes working together as a team is better than anything I could achieve on my own. The achievements of the team, even when it requires self-sacrifice on my part, are better than anything I could achieve on my own. So that's number 6. And then finally, number 7, in the third phase of the continuum, which is continual improvement, he has only one of his habits of effective people here, and he calls that sharpening the saw. And that means it comes from a story about somebody cutting down trees, and each day it takes more work and it's slower, and the lumberjack doesn't understand why it's getting harder and harder to cut down trees, and it's because he hasn't stopped to sharpen his saw. You have to sharpen your saw, which means you improve yourself over time so that you continue to do things well and even do things better. And Covey gives examples like spend time in daily prayer, spend time daily reading, spend time daily exercising, stay healthy and improve yourself. I've looked at studies of CEOs and their reading habits, and CEOs, who you would think would be the busiest people on earth, read voraciously. They consume books because they know there's always more to learn. There are always more ideas out there, and the ideas have to be chased because good ideas, once captured, create new blood for an organization. And every effective CEO and leader and pastor knows that. And so those are Covey's 7 habits of highly effective people. Again, that's just a broad brush outline of the 7 habits. You should read the book yourself. If those interest you, if you want to know more about that or more about being a highly effective leader, I'd encourage you to pick up Covey's book and give it a read. It's a quick read. It's not hard literature, and it's worth your time. So that's my book review for the day. I'll try to do one every week during this course. Again, if you need any help, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me. Send me a direct message or leave a message in the comments. You've already got my email address if you've watched the earlier lectures, and I'd be glad to communicate with you and process this with you as you go through the course. Again, God bless you. I'll see you next week.